Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
I found my way home across the Grand Mirage. Ever since the
Well, hi, this is the Alison Arngrim Show, and I'm Alison Arngrim. And a lot of you probably know me as Nellie Olson from Little House on the Prairie. Here on the Alison Arngrim Show, we like to talk about the things that make you feel good. The TV shows that made you feel good, the movies that made you feel good, and people who are doing wonderful, insane, interesting, fun, beautiful things in this world to make the world a better place, and they're doing exciting stuff. And, we have a good one tonight. I have with me the newly appointed interim president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the people who bring you the Emmys. Yes. And he's not just that. He also, from 2010 to 2016, was the head of news, government, elections at Twitter. He was actually referred to by the New York Times as the living embodiment of Twitter, which I'm not really sure if that's a compliment or not. I don't know. But he's a very nice guy. So we have with us Adam Sharp. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alison. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've had quite the career, and I hope you're not really the living embodiment of Twitter. I think there's an ointment you could get to clear that up if that's the case. I don't. Well, how are you, and welcome to the show. And what's it like to be the new president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences?
Thank you. Well, it's actually incredible. My involvement with the organization is nearing 25 years now. While I'm new to this role, I actually owe the Academy quite a great deal because in the mid-'90s, they established a scholarship program.
Really?
And I won that scholarship in its second year. My first full-time job was working for one of the trustees of the Academy who discovered me through the scholarship program. And then I went on to be part of the committee selecting scholarship winners, chairing that committee, and then that led to this position. So it's really exciting to have been involved with the Academy from all these different angles and now be in a role where I can help build the Academy's next chapter after all they've done for me over the years.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's almost like they're getting their nickels worth back. I mean, you got the scholarship, and now you're president and helping them.
Exactly.
Well, now we just had the 45th annual Daytime Emmy Awards, which actually doubled its viewership from last year. That's unusual because what we're hearing lately over the last few years, award shows are having trouble getting people to stay tuned to them. Back when I was young and you had 3 channels and you had all of the things that were award shows, that was it. Everybody was glued to them. Now everything's all over the map. But now you're telling me that the Daytime Emmys that actually went up.
Yes, in fact. The Daytime Emmys were the only major award show to show year-over-year audience growth from last year to this year. And part of that, I think, is because we're no longer on television, at least how we traditionally think of it. For many years, the Daytime Emmys were, ironically, on in prime time, rotating on different networks the same way as the primetime Emmys are.
Right.
And several years ago, owing largely to the fact that daytime programming itself had changed, fewer soap operas in particular, the Daytime Emmys were not renewed to be carried on primetime television, network television. They moved to cable for a few years, and then for the last 2 years have been streaming. And I think that transition was certainly precipitated by the changing trends of television. More people watching streaming, more people watching DVR, more people entering the workforce who would normally be home watching daytime television.
Well, that's what I was going to say. TV has changed just drastically. I was just going to say TV. I mean, what did daytime
the digital
is?
community caught up.
Right, because I was going to say TV has changed so drastically. I mean, when I think of it, I was on a series. It was you had 3 networks. I mean, everything was network. I am old enough to remember when television shows that were on cable TV got nominated, they had to get an ACE award because you had to have a cable TV award. Because if you were HBO, things like, obviously Netflix didn't exist yet, but things that were on cable weren't considered real TV. And now you look, and all of the SAG awards, all of the Emmys, I mean, it's all the cable stuff. It's all Netflix and Amazon and HBO. They're all swamping the Emmys. It's all the networks can do to get a foot in. And it's just completely shifted. And then the number of people who say, well, I don't watch TV, I watch the streaming. It's the new thing now with a show is like, when is a show on? I don't know. What do you mean, when is it on? It's always on. And TV is just drastically just become a whole other thing. And how do the Emmys and the whole Academy navigate this? It's changing every few months now.
Well, it's interesting. We still call them the primetime Emmys and the daytime Emmys, but even those names are based on that old construct because they're tied to the time of day shows air. And as you note, shows don't have an air time. And even those that are on traditional linear television, a lot of the audience are watching it on their DVRs several days later, or they're watching them streaming from the network's own apps and services like Hulu. If you look at the primetime Emmys, for example, that are given by our sister academy on the West Coast, they this year just released their nominees last week, and Netflix was the number 1 most nominated network, breaking the juggernaut of HBO of the last 18 years. For our daytime Emmys this year, CBS was the most nominated network, but they were followed close behind by Netflix and Amazon. The daytime Emmys were actually the first of the major awards programs to recognize digital achievement. We were awarding and nominating YouTube over a decade ago.
Right. That's right. You guys, a lot of people, if you at home don't know, yes, you can get an Emmy for a YouTube show. They recognize that. They have made that jump.
Absolutely. And part of it is that when you look at these various academies, you look at National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Oscars, the National Recording Academy that do the Grammys. When each of these academies were formed, what they were honoring was really defined by the technology. We're going to have a TV academy, we're going to have a film academy, we're going to have a music academy. And these were all completely different tangible products. TV was what I watched on the box in the living room. Film was what I went to a movie theater and saw on the big screen. Music came on a record.
And
now,
the talent was separate. You didn't see the actors were separate. Actors who did television didn't do movies. People did movies, didn't do television. There was a wall. And when you talk about the technology, for a lot of people don't realize, you hear about the Screen Actors Guild, and if you're an actor, you know that there used to be AFTRA and SAG as 2 separate things, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. But when I was growing up, SAG and AFTRA were very, very separate because these shows were filmed on film and these shows were filmed on video. And this was actually a real designation that even though SAG was supposed to be movies and AFTRA was supposed to be TV, well, Little House on the Prairie and many other TV shows were filmed on Panavision on film, so they were SAG. But literally the only difference became, was your show on film or video? And I remember, even as a kid, I said, that is the silliest reason to have 2 separate unions I can think of. You mean if the different thing is in the camera and I'm doing the same thing? And that was a real thing back then. And now it's like, okay, you find some film. And that's the same thing with TV. I mean, I remember when daytime was traditionally women who stayed home to take care of the kids and they watched soap operas. That was what was happening. But everyone I know now who watches soap operas, they go to work, they tape, it's on the TiVo, and they come home in the evening and watch a soap opera. That's when people watch soaps.
That's why you have these new digital-only soaps like Ladies of the Lake and The Bay and others that are able to go head-to-head with the networks because they're being consumed the same way. Those technologies I talked about, television, film, the record, that were so distinct a generation ago, all of that is now consumed through the same device.
Right.
I can do all on my iPhone.
It's
And
all on my
there
phone.
is still something that draws the difference. When I'm holding my iPhone, I know when I'm watching a movie. I intrinsically can tell when I'm listening to music, and I know when I'm watching a TV show. And I think that speaks to this fact that the reality is these terms, movie, TV, records, aren't as much about the technology anymore as the way they tell stories and how those stories make us feel. And so that does cause complexity now when we're all awarding people in different spaces and you see Netflix and Amazon competing in everyone's competitions. But the audience tends to sort that out because the audience knows whether what they're looking at is what makes them feel like they're watching a TV show or a movie or listening to a record.
Right, they know that it's true. They say, "Well, I know it. This is a movie that is on HBO. This is a TV show on my Netflix." They do. But that's the thing. It's a new definition. The definition of when it is on or what format it's in is now completely been blown out of the water. It's now the audience said this is a TV show, and it can be on YouTube. It can be on the phone. And of course, I don't like watching things so much on my phone. It's small. I do like the fact that I can stream things on my actual television that is regular size.
And that's something that's seeing a shift as well. After many years of the audience aiming for the bigger and bigger screens, and you'd see the commercials for, okay, now it's the 60-inch, it's the 80-inch, and make sure you get the new TV before Super Bowl Sunday. When you look at the new audiences that are coming into the marketplace, the millennial viewers, the majority don't own a traditional television. Their principal viewing platform for video content is their cell phone, sometimes a tablet or a laptop.
It's often a laptop. It's a monitor. They don't have a TV. They have a monitor, really.
Yep. And you're seeing the change where when you were starring on television, that was time and date appointment viewing. The family would gather on the couch and watch it together. Now you're likely to walk into the typical American home and find every member of the family sitting in a different corner of the room with their devices and their headphones watching a different program. And for one, it might be what we'd call daytime. The other, it might be what we call prime time, but they are watching them at the same time.
Now, this also kind of messes with the whole TV season, and I know this is something that with figuring out what time, which award season you're in is a thing. But I know for actors too, it's driven us crazy. Like, well, the season, you had hiatus, you had summer reruns, and you had the show. But they shoot a whole block of a show, and you binge, like Stranger Things. That came out on a date, and then I watched all 8 of them. And so when did the season end and begin? And when does this episode air? And what does it mean anymore? And in fact, are we going to find ourselves saying, an episode aired, and is that going to be like saying dial the phone, and we're going to sound weird because it's not really on the air anymore?
Well, ironically, I think the old movie term of it premiered is starting to become the more relevant. But you're right. The traditional television season ran the 26 episodes if you were a comedy, 22 if you were a drama. That had to take you from September to May. You'd have the hiatus in the summer. And cable started to chip away at that, seeing the opportunity to put their premieres in the summer to counter-program that lack of content on the broadcast networks. The early digital shows started to follow the same format. But then this concept of the binge watching started to take shape. And that was one I don't think programmers fully expected or anticipated. And the networks have had a little bit of a harder time adapting to that than the digital platforms, which of course didn't have a history to be tied to, don't have commercial breaks and advertisers and affiliate time slots that they need to hit. And therefore could really just tailor the show for that audience. And so it can be 10 episodes, it can be 6 episodes, it can be 30 episodes, whatever the audience is willing to watch and the show creators think is necessary to tell their story. And if one episode is 48 minutes and another is an
Right.
hour, 2 minutes, because that's what it took to tell the story, so be it. So it's not just that the viewing habits have changed, it's also opening doors to change the storytelling habits. And
Oh,
the
and there's-
ability for producers and writers to tell their stories in different ways and not be trying to hit those act breaks on the clean 15-minute marks during the show.
Right, you're not limited to, well, we have to make it 22 minutes because it's a half-hour show. And you can also do mini shows. I mean, I was on Life Interrupted, and we had little mini webisodes. And then I think it was Inspiration TV did a thing a while back with Ralph Waite, and it was a series. And the episodes were 2 minutes long, and then you could go watch a 15-minute thing online after they aired the 2-minute episode. And yeah, so episodes, it's like, well, how long is the episode? I don't know. How long would we like it to be?
And that's where the storytelling isn't even limited to what you're seeing during the show itself. Sometimes those webisodes or social videos are giving context or experiences of the characters that are outside of the main ABC plot that you're seeing on the main show, and giving more color to their characters and more dimension
Right.
to their characters to draw the audience in even deeper.
It's like those playing the at-home game. It's like it's so now,
Exactly. And there's a lot of creative things to do around that. I remember a few years ago there was a detective show in Germany where it was, a typical crime procedural, and it focused on this one detective, but like any of these, they have scenes when they enter the police station and interact with the other detectives, and they'll make a little brief mention of the cases they're working on and so on. But if you went on Twitter and Facebook, you actually were following the other detectives
Follow the other
as
cases.
they left the room and so on. So the show on television was really just where all these characters came together, but one of them had their story unraveling over here, another one had their story developing over here, and you could basically tap into this whole world through your phone all day long in real time, not just that hour you dropped in to catch it on video.
now so I said I love that this is happening. Like I said, it's completely like another planet for people like me who grew up on TV in that era. But I like this because it is extremely creative. Now, how is this impacting the awards? Where are the Emmys going to go with this? Because as I said, it's such a long history of having your daytime Emmy and your primetime Emmy and your Emmy for this and your Emmy for that, and like now how are we going to rework our whole award system to encompass all of this?
Well, that's an area where the audience, I think, has shifted it for us, and where now, with that shift coming off television and the growth of digital, a lot of these things have just naturally found a new normal. If we rewind 5 years or even less, 3 or 4 years, a lot of premature obituaries were written about the daytime Emmys.
Right? Oh, yeah.
People
They say,
look
there's
at
no
the fact
daytime.
that-
There's no daytime. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no daytime. As you noted, the number of soap operas went from the mid-teens down to just 4 on the air today.
Dozens.
Women who were that key demographic were going back into the workforce. Ratings were dropping. The daytime Emmys were no longer carried on primetime television. For a year, they had no television home anywhere.
Which
And
definitely
so
sounds
you
like
kept
it's
hearing
over. It's,
Exactly. And then every award show seeing year-to-year decline.
yep.
But
even
then you
the
look at
Oscars. The
this
Oscars
year.
the ratings go down. It's terrible.
Yes. Oscar ratings went down, primetime Emmys went down, Grammys went down. But then you look at this year's daytime Emmys, more entries than ever before, more ticket sales for the ceremony than ever before, more viewers than when it was last on broadcast network television, and the only major award
crazy.
show to see year-over-year growth. And that growth, in terms of the entries and tickets in particular, were largely from these digital platforms. And so it would make sense that if television, now that sort of small t, what we feel is television, even if we're not seeing it on that traditional box, is migrating to that digital world, and that's where that audience is for it. And the new audience coming in among millennials, half of them don't even have the traditional television. In many ways, having the show on traditional television at a time of day that was disconnected from the people who are watching on television. So here we have the daytime Emmys in prime time. So the people who watch it on a real TV in the daytime aren't watching TV.
Right.
And then the people who watch it digitally can't watch it because of the license fee. So the approach that we are taking now by streaming it across all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Connect, we were able to connect to where the audience is watching these shows and put it into that stream as opposed to trying to bring them back to an old format that wasn't working anymore. And so this is incredibly exciting for us and shows, I think, momentum and a real opportunity for the Academy to go in that direction that the audience is going.
Well, I know you have more entries than ever before because I'm now a voting member, and as I pulled up during the nomination portion of the voting, I went, oh, I only have to watch 167 shows. It's like, what? There's like 167 nominees in this category, and I looked at that. Okay, I've watched these 40 shows, and I've heard of these other 47, and so it's like, so trying to go through, and they send me the DVDs, and then of course I have all the different platforms. But now, is that ever going to be a problem? Because I know it's difficult for me that there are so many shows. There's no way I'm going to have seen all 167 actors that are up for nomination. And I'm pretty diligent in trying to watch at least some of everything so I can say, okay, this person was good, and try also to nominate people who are not as well known, not nominate obviously the same people over and over again or always getting a nomination, to look for new talent that may be on a show that not everybody's watching. But it's very difficult. There's 167 people in each category. How is that going to impact things? Because I'm trying to imagine back in the 1970s, it's 167 people up for an Emmy. How? No. How does that work?
Well, you're right. In that 3-network model, you had it a little bit easier because at the end of the day, you only had 24 hours per network.
Right.
There was a natural limit to how much television could be on the air in a given week. As a practical matter, having a lot of entrants is a good problem to have, obviously. And there's different ways of solving it. Different categories are handled differently in that regard. In the daytime Emmys, some of those more crowded categories will do multiple rounds of judging. So good. Some judges get our group cut from 100 down to a smaller group, and then another panel of judges gets us down to our nominees, so that we're able to break it up a little bit more fairly that way, fairly to the entrants and to the judges. I think there's also, I want to go back to one note here. When we look at why there's this diversity, it is that freedom of not being limited by the time slots anymore and not being limited by that 24 hours per network. And that is really bolstering types of programming that perhaps were underrepresented before. When I was growing up, children's programming was Saturday morning.
Yep.
That was your choice. If you wanted kids programming, it was going to be on Saturday morning. And now, ironically, you turn on the networks, for the most part, there isn't children's programming on Saturday morning.
Saturday morning kind of sucks now, honestly.
Yes. But you look at Netflix or Amazon.
Huge.
Massive.
There's Nick Jr. and all the Amazon stuff, and then there's all the, I mean, literally when you pull up the Netflix, it has like, here's your little box. Oh, there's one whole box, kids. I mean, it's just wonderful.
And
huge independent programming. Sprout, and it's just endless networks.
Sprout, exactly. And so there is so much to choose from now for kids and for parents trying to find good programming for their kids that didn't exist 6.5 days of the week before. And it's those categories where we've seen the most explosive growth in the last few years on the daytime Emmys.
Well, now they see there's a good thing, and as you said, the diversity in programming, the creativity, the kind of shows that I'm now seeing that we just never wouldn't have gotten on TV. There wasn't room for it, and the executives would go, "I don't know what this is about," and yes, and the roles for women and the roles for people who aren't cookie cutter, regular, perfect little raisins for eyes, gingerbread cutout people. Everybody has a show. There's a show with everybody on it. It's every kind of person. The entire width and breadth of humanity is now represented somewhere on a sitcom or a drama. And now I turn on the TV and go, this is great. This is like the real world.
Yeah, and it's the changing dynamics of the industry. When you had the three-network environment, there was a certain programming to the lowest common denominator. That if one network had a 3-camera live studio audience sitcom, in general, the best bet would be to do the same on your network and split that audience, because half of the audience that wanted to see the traditional sitcom was still bigger than the audience for niche genre X.
Yep.
Now, however, if you're a Netflix or an Amazon, you can serve all of them, because you are not limited to saying, I have half an hour, I can only put one thing in this slot. So now you can put the multi-camera sitcom if you'd like, but if someone in that half hour wants to watch a documentary instead, they can watch that too.
And the actors, the performers, the different people who would not have been on TV 40 years ago, thank God, are now, thank God, be on TV in just these incredible shows. And people being allowed to play interesting characters and do interesting things that just they would never have had before.
Yeah, and it's not just limited to entertainment programming either. We're about to announce our nominees, for example, for the News and Documentary Emmys that will be held in October in New York.
Oh, and documentaries have exploded.
Yes, because up until a few years ago, 95% of the documentaries that were being released in a few movie houses in New York and LA to qualify for the Oscar, but could not get a screening anywhere else because, frankly, they didn't put enough butts and seats in the 24-screen multiplex at the mall.
Right, documentaries, that was the category at the Oscars that nobody had seen when you watch the Oscars, because where do you go see a documentary? That was the documentary. Unless you're in Canada. Canadians love documentaries. Canadians would put the documentaries on the TV. Those are the only people watching the documentaries. And now it's great. I can turn on my TV and see a documentary about anything.
Yep, and we are, I'd say, in a broader golden age of television, but specifically in documentary and nonfiction programming as well, in that turn on Netflix, whatever you want to learn about, there's probably a documentary there. There's another company called Curiosity Stream, which is essentially just a Netflix for documentary material. And some of these are just 5-minute or 15-minute documentaries or programs just explaining a concept. A whole series of films, just different basic concepts of math and sort of the history of them, for example, or of art, or of architecture, or of technology. And this would not have been accessible to a mainstream audience just 5 years or 10 years ago.
So it is an improvement. It's just a radical change. And now, until fairly recently, you were head of news, government, and elections at Twitter, which has also, I mean, obviously Twitter and Facebook and social media have impacted all of this and how we do awards and everything else. And this show, we do a whole Facebook live stream too. So this is also on Facebook as well as on UBN. Did you leave because it got weird? I just know because I love Twitter. I started going onto Twitter around late 2000s because my book came out around 2010, and I noticed all the writers were on Twitter. And I still like Twitter, but I have seen Twitter change. And I have seen Twitter be primarily political discourse now, and political, not what you could even quite call discourse, and that it's way more that than anything that it was a few years ago. And Twitter has gotten, well, fairly crazy. They just had a whole cleansing of the various bots and algorithm fake people on there. I didn't lose too many because most of my fans on Twitter were real people. Yay. But how bizarre was that to be head of news, government, elections at Twitter? How did you try to manage that? Because, I mean, I look now and I'm thinking that news, government, elections at Twitter is kind of chaotic at this point.
Well, I left. No,
because you're not there to fix it. Okay.
I wish I could. So I left at the end of 2016, and I'd been at Twitter for 6 years, which is a lifetime in tech dog years.
Yes. Very long in that world.
When I joined the company in 2010, fewer than 1 in 5 members of Congress even had Twitter accounts.
Right. Okay.
No one in the cabinet had a Twitter account.
Nobody.
The president wasn't on Twitter yet at the time. And so for me, in that 6 years, I think we did build the platform up to being the preeminent platform for news and political discussion in the world. Now, the content of that discussion has certainly taken a more negative tone, particularly in the last year or so, as it has off of Twitter and in society more broadly, and which is the cause and which is the effect is probably a little bit of both. But it's funny, from a page from the book of Be Careful What You Wish For, in my job interview for Twitter back in 2010, I was sitting there talking to one of the founders of the company, and I asked him, okay, putting aside all these different metrics and measurements and so on and so forth, if there is just one thing, one goal, which if we hit that, you look at me and say, you did your job, you're done. And he said, mind you, this is 2010, President of the United States uses Twitter every day to speak directly to the American people.
No, they said they wanted that. That was the thing people said they wanted.
So,
and then there was a lightning bolt struck the building, and a voice said, "You are doomed."
I've reminded him of that story on a few occasions since then. But when you look at President Trump's use of the platform, it really is remarkable. And you have to separate how he's using it from the content for a moment. Mm-hmm. Because the content is where we tend to get into our political corners in how we interpret it. But the fact that the President of the United States can speak directly to the American people and to the world without a filter, where you can hear directly from the president, you can make your voice heard to the president, you can ask questions of the president, and not have a single gatekeeper be the one to block that, either on the White House staff, in the media, or just the technology where you could only get that reach before if the president sat in a studio with a satellite dish on.
Right.
That is a remarkable change, and it brings us back to a kind of retail connection to our leaders that has never really worked beyond perhaps the city council level because the country is too big to make it work. But now people can have that one-on-one connection.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, now I've also seen the one where they had a thing where they said, whereas people often will block people on Twitter, they've had enough of, but they said, no, the president can't really block people because since the account is official and is now officially a government outlet where the president addresses the entire universe, then it becomes a government outlet and you have to have access to your elected officials. So now you can't, it's this whole other universe.
Exactly. And so the courts have actually found precisely that when it comes to the president's Twitter page, because he has chosen to put himself there, he has turned that into a public forum. and that it needs to be treated legally the same way as if you were a member of Congress and you wanted to walk into the Capitol building and air your grievances with him there.
You have to be able to get an appointment, come in and be able to do that. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If it was some kind of vanity account, I remember when candidates running for office first started popping up on Twitter, they were sort of these prepackaged little tweets and little sort of like press things and like photos and mom and apple pie and kind of like little happy stories. They weren't like live. And if it was just like little package thing of like, hello, this is a message from the president, well, then it wouldn't be the same thing. But because he has said, I'm going to make official statements, official binding statements on Twitter, that's now made it like it's like the Senate or the Congress, that you have to be able to have access to it.
Yes, and it connects with people because they know it's coming from him. If the same things were very clearly being written by staff, people would not respond the same way because it does not have that same authentic connection.
Now that's been a debate because sometimes they change. People go, "Ooh, is that a staff one? Did somebody write that, or did he write that?" But then usually he shows up on TV later and says, "Yes, I wrote that." So yeah.
Exactly, and he has a few staffers that tend to be very good at capturing his voice, but even then, he tends to do a lot of it himself. And when you look at members of Congress who are successful on Twitter, it's much the same way. Because
they're live. They're on there.
Yeah. We have been so conditioned, and I think this is the same dynamic you see with television and how we interact with stars of TV. We've gotten so conditioned over the last century with TV and radio as the dominant media to consume any information or content, that entire world is locked away in this box behind that glass screen. And so, of course, we feel like our leaders are out of touch because they are this distant thing in the box. But the moment we start to recognize their humanity and connect to them as something other than the talking head and feel that we are getting that unvarnished access to them, that winds up being a deeper connection that can be tremendously motivating, whether it is to drive you to the polls or to tune into a show. You know, Shonda Rhimes, the creator of Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, and other shows, she'll tell you, Scandal, which was a mega hit on ABC, she credits a lot of that to social media because the cast would sit on Twitter and Facebook during the show and engage with the audience.
Live
So now,
tweeting.
instead of sitting back on the couch and passively watching this show, you're now leaning forward over your phone, directly engaging with the cast and having a shared experience.
Well, we've even done that.
The same thing about The Voice.
With reruns of Little House. They've had events where they've like had, okay, today's episode of Little House is being rerun, and had me and cast members get on live tweet the episode from 40 years ago, and you wouldn't be amazed at the people who log on for this. And that's one of the things, like when I logged on as a writer in 2010, I noticed that all the authors were going on Twitter, and that's where I was meeting all the other writers, and people would come to my book signing. I'd say, how many people at this book signing heard about where to come on Twitter? And the whole room raises their hand. So that's when I went, oh, this is how you do this. And it became a thing. And now, I mean, around that time, and then much more so now, when you go to a publisher with a book, they ask you, well, are you on Twitter, and how many followers, and are you on Instagram, and are you on Facebook, and so are you reaching out to these people? They're now having classes at the Screen Actors Guild and at the Conservatory where members can come free and learn how to do their social media. And they said, okay, it's not that the studio is necessarily going to say, we're hiring this person because they have 1 million followers on Twitter and you don't. But if it's a tie, if they like both of you equally for the role, and one of you isn't on social media at all, and the other has thousands of followers that they can go to and say, watch this show, that's who they're going to take.
And this, I think, marks a fascinating shift in the power dynamic of Hollywood, of journalism, in that it puts more of the power back in the hands of the performers and of the writers. On the news side, I'd say it's a return of the byline again. For the entertainment side, performers now bring their own audience. So it's not desperately hoping to get the big network show so the network brings the audience to see you. No, now the networks are trying to get you because of the audience you can bring to them.
How do we, though, deal with where, on the negatives, how do we deal with the craziness? I mean, I'm friends with William Shatner on Twitter, and he's been involved in these Mad Hatter's Tea Party arguments with fans. It just, he seems to enjoy in going in circular arguments with these people. But it's kind of like, what is going on? Okay, on the one hand, it's great. I can reach out to my fans. I'm very lucky. Little House fans tend to be very nice people. But there's these situations where celebrities are engaging with their fans and something goes wrong. And if it was a normal fan meet and greet and you had one person who was having an issue and you just say, well, okay, you need to leave now. Suddenly you have thousands of people that you can't see and yelling at you. What? How do we get through this? Because it's kind of the wild, wild west. How do we do this marvelous thing where we can reach out to people when it goes wrong and suddenly people are just like throwing dishes on Twitter? What do we do?
Well, first of all, I have to say, as a lifelong Star Trek fan who always thought the time loop episodes were the most engaging, seeing Captain Kirk in a circular argument is entertaining. But putting that aside, you are absolutely right, and there are pros and cons to it. The same idea where when one person would stand up in a meet and greet or a politician's town hall, they'd be the one to get an answer to their question, and maybe a few dozen other people would hear it. Now, everyone gets that opportunity, even if they can't make it to San Diego for Comic-Con,
right,
for example. But when you enlarge that pool of people, then you do invite some of the challenges. I think the advice I've given to candidates and performers and journalists is to remember a few things. Number one, everyone has a pretty equal voice on the platform. And so you have supporters there as well, and very often those supporters will rally to your defense. And so let them duke it out while you try to stay above the fray.
I with Prairie fans, that's definitely the case. If people are mean to me, there's so many Prairie fans who are like, no, shut up, leave her alone.
Well, and I will tell you, I have a former colleague down in Washington who has actually live tweeted a number of Prairie episodes, and will be so excited to hear we spoke about it tonight.
Oh, we must hook up on Twitter and Instagram and whatnot with them, yes.
Fantastic. The other thing I would say is to keep in mind, particularly on Twitter, you see when someone is talking about you because Twitter has that notification stream, and when someone mentions you, it shows up there.
Yep.
But for the typical user, they see only the people they're following or who are mentioning them. And so what might feel like 100 people saying nasty things about you because they're showing up in your notifications doesn't necessarily mean anyone else is seeing those tweets but you. So you
may be having an argument in a broom closet. You're having this terrible fight with someone, and everyone else is going, what? No, we have no idea that you're even there.
Exactly, because the algorithm is designed to tell you a tree fell in the forest, even if there was no one else around.
Well,
so you often see these accounts with just one or two followers,
yes,
or these bot accounts, which make it feel awful when you are the target of it. And so I know it's not a lot of comfort, but if it helps at all, it is to recognize these people do not have an audience per se.
I have
the
noticed
Twitter
that
algorithms, as the Facebook ones, are pretty good at tamping those down. And for those who are reaching a real audience, they also tend to be reaching your supporters who will stand up and defend you.
I have noticed for other celebrities that a lot of the people who say particularly negative things, when I go to look, I see that they have like 40 people. So I'm like, okay. But it is weird. And I tend not to get in screaming matches with people on Twitter or Facebook because I don't know this person. Yell at a stranger. And then I also didn't even know if they're real. And I thought that seems like an odd way to exert my energy, yelling and screaming at an invisible person I do not know who may or may not in fact exist.
And whose main motivation is often to get you to yell and scream. Because every one of those accounts is the TMZ camera at the airport, but without TMZ backing them up. The goal is to get you to lose your cool. And that's where, now this doesn't mean to be afraid or not engage with people, but you reward meaningful conversation. When people ask you a question, answer it. Even if people are critical, engage in the criticism, and if they are respectful about it, be respectful in return, so no one could say you're ducking it. Now, that probably applies more to those who engage in political debate than simply talking about television or so on, but you can even see certain creative choices there where someone's piling on a director for, why did they do this in that movie? I think more should say, hey, let me show you some of the other drafts we were playing with and why we settled on this and made this choice. And I think what happens is people tend to get defensive as opposed to trying to find that voice in the crowd that disagrees but is willing to have a discussion. You haven't seen many examples, I think, of creators or entertainers who've been criticized for a creative choice. Why did you do that edit, write it that way, kill that character, or what have you? If those who are the target of that criticism were to say, well, let me walk you through the creative process and how we reached that point, I think you would find an audience that would find that tremendously engaging and would reward it accordingly.
Well, yeah, you'd have all the normal people would find it interesting and would, have to hop on the feed because, well, okay, clearly I see why you can't be at Twitter anymore. You make far too much sense. You're far too logical and calm and normal to be on Twitter. So I'm glad now you're at the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Well, we're going to wrap up, but this is amazing. So where can we watch the Emmys and when we want to watch the daytime Emmys?
So the next daytime Emmys will be live from Pasadena
Live from Pasadena?
Announced the date yet.
Oh, okay.
But
soon.
From Pasadena, the news and documentary Emmys are coming up October 1st.
October 1st.
Those you can all watch streaming at emmyonline.tv. And then the primetime Emmy Awards, which are from our sister academy on the West Coast, are coming up in September on NBC.
All righty, and soon it's going to be time to vote for the ones who made the final cut of the nominees, and I get to go online and I get to log in and look at the thing and say yes and pick people. So this is all very exciting.
Happy voting.
And so people can read more about you on all of these platforms over at the NATA site and everything. But as I said, you make far too much sense to be in entertainment or on Twitter. And so we should have you come on again.
I'd be happy to. And until then, you can follow us at the Emmys or me at Adam S.
Excellent. And absolutely, by all means, tell your friend to hit me up on Twitter and I'll introduce him to Shatner or something.
Fantastic. Alison, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this has been the Alison Arngrim Show with Alison Arngrim. Thank you.
I found my way home across the ground.